Before I dive in with my professional serious man introduction, I just want to note we always have like that musical countdown at the beginning, and I get to watch students sort of groove in the background. And Lavi, who's been joining us all year long, is grooving so much she might just groove right out of the room at some point. So a thank you to you for being so enthusiastic about our broadcast. We appreciate you. My name is Jesse. I'm here with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. And if you're joining us for the first time, like so many of you are, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And of all days you could be joining us, I'm so glad you're joining us today. This is week 3 in our epic February series showcasing the most amazing women in science and exploration on planet Earth. Everything has gone to our YouTube channel, including this one, so you can watch them in like 3 weeks, 3 years down the road. Lots there to explore and discover. We've got polar bears, sharks coming up. We've done earthquakes and space and more. It's been just such a wild ride. So a big thank you to all of you for helping us keep this amazing vision alive. Now, before I dive in with our topic du jour, and I'm particularly excited about today's topic, I want to note we do have a Kahoot today. So between our talk and our Q&A, if you want to play along with a little 4-question quiz, you can pull up that game pin below. Keep it extra interactive in the middle. We'll also have some interactivity throughout, so please keep your fingers on the keyboards so that you can join us as we ask some questions of you. Now, without further ado, I'm so glad to welcome back Dr. Linda Welzenbach Fries. She is one of the coolest scientists we've ever had on, one of the most enthusiastic people we've ever had on, and she's going to talk about meteorite hunting in Antarctica. And if there's a cooler job title and thing than that, I don't know what it is. It rocks a lot, and it's one of my dream things. Of all the scientists we've ever gotten the chance to bring on, there are very few things that I would give anything to do. I would drop everything. I'd shirk all my work responsibilities to go off and do. And Linda's job is one of those things that I would go do. So I'm very excited for her to get to explain all the cool stuff she gets up to. Without further ado, I'm going to welcome her into the broadcast so we can get going. Linda, welcome back. So nice to see you again.
It is great to be here, Jesse. Thank you so much.
I know you've got a lot to share, so I'm going to dip off and I'll let you pull this beautiful presentation up and dive in, and we can explore all the fun stuff that you get to do. Here we go.
Okay. Everybody can see my main slide, I hope.
Couldn't be better.
All right. I'm very happy and excited to talk to all of you today about my experience collecting meteorites in Antarctica. And at the very end, I'm going to show you how Antarctic meteorites have actually helped us in small ways understand the origin and evolution of our solar system. But first, I'm going to start by telling you that when I was your age, most of you anyway, I would never, ever have imagined that I would end up searching for meteorites in Antarctica. Nor did I think that a mineral collecting obsession, which I started at about age 7, which you can see here on the far left, continued through graduate school, would actually lead to a job at the Smithsonian Institution, helping to update the National Geology Gems and Mineral Hole. And so from there, I just never wanted to leave the museum. So I leveraged my passion and that experience to try and get a job as the Meteorite Collection Manager. No experience in meteorites, but lots of experience in collections. And it was during that interview, and I'll never forget this, they're like, so would you be interested in going to Antarctica to collect meteorites? And I wasn't going to say no. And of course, the rest is history. Interestingly, in a sort of parallel timeline, just starting about 3 hours after I was born in 1969, there was a rather unexpected discovery by some Japanese geodetic survey scientists of a group of really weird rocks sitting on the ice, and they were all different from each other, and they didn't belong in that area. Around the same time that I started collecting minerals, there was a US scientist, his name was Bill Cassidy. He's in the center picture there on the left-hand side. He learned about this from a science conference and sought to get support from the United States National Science Foundation to go look for meteorites. And it took a few years, but he finally got that support. And not too far from McMurdo Station, which you'll see in a little bit, we found meteorites. And that begins the 50 years of the Antarctic Meteorite Program, which is a really, really unique partnership between academia, which runs the program. NASA, by virtue of curating and managing the Apollo collections, was the initial institution that curated the meteorites. The Smithsonian Institution, where I worked, does the classification and long-term archiving of meteorites, and then the National Science Foundation, which supports all of the science that happens, the US science that happens in Antarctica. Now, Before I jump into why Antarctica is such a special place to hunt for meteorites, I'm really interested to know whether my audience knows what a meteorite is. And Jesse, I'm assuming you're going to monitor the chat and let me know what their answers are.
I'm in.
In the meantime, I'm going to give you a little slide here of visual clues, and I'm looking for just a super simple definition. Just what is the simplest way to describe these objects from space?
Let's see. And I know we have a bunch of StreamYard classes. We've got a bunch of YouTubers. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We've got space rocks. So just generally rocks coming from space. Is there anything specific about it? Flying rocks in space? I like that. As opposed to those stationary ones. What about where they are? Does a meteorite specifically do anything perhaps? What do you think?
All right. Everything so far, you hit it the very first time. They are a rock from space. And they're very different from the phenomenon that we see as essentially fireballs or meteors or shooting stars. That is the part in which that object from space has basically entered the Earth's atmosphere, what we call cosmic velocity. The atmosphere is dense and therefore causes the outside to become super hot, superheated. And that the meteor is essentially vaporizing rock. Meteorite is nothing more than the residual material that successfully lands on the surface of Earth. And that's a rock from space. Okay. And so that actually leads to that next logical question, which I came from some of the answers in the chat. Where do meteorites come from? Where do they originate from?
I want to note too that this may be a question in our Kahoot later. Where do we think the meteorites are coming from? Also, I love the scale of the planets in this picture. You've got like Earth and Mars, and they're so tiny compared to Saturn and Jupiter. Where do our meteorites come from in the solar system? The edge, okay, we've got the edge, we've got the middle there. So in this picture, they're sort of between the smaller planets and the big planets crashing into each other. So maybe big things smack off and then little things fly off them. And that's where our meteorites come from. All really good answers, guys.
Whoop. And there it is. Sorry, didn't mean to click it so soon. They come from the asteroid belt, most of them. The asteroid belt, which is essentially between Mars and Jupiter, is essentially a rubble pile, a residue of material from the earliest history of the solar system. So how they get from the asteroid belt to Earth is an interesting and dynamic process that includes a little bit of tug of war between Jupiter and the sun and the actual sun's effect on these individual asteroids. What I want you to see, look on the left-hand graphic there, is that the asteroid belt is not just sort of like a big donut of rubble. It's actually a really interesting and organized area that contains 3 concentric rings with gaps, and those gaps are called Kirkwood gaps. Those gaps are essentially areas of instability that are created by that tug of war between Jupiter and the sun that is literally cleared by that push and pull. Now, the individual meteorites themselves, as they're moving around in their respective rings, are also affected by the sun. And that's the graphic that's in the upper right-hand side. It's called the Yarkovsky drift. And essentially what's happening is the asteroids are rotating. They turn as they're basically orbiting the sun, and they're heated on one side and cooled on the other. And that heating and cooling can actually cause enough wobble that sometimes they leave their travel lanes. They can collide with each other. They can fall into those gaps in between the concentric rings. And ultimately, those gaps stay as gaps because literally gravity sweeps everything out. And so if an asteroid falls into that gap, it's going to either be cleared out to the inner part of the solar system, become a near-Earth crosser, or it's going to be ejected maybe outside the solar system or to the outer part of the solar system. And you can see from this image here in the lower right, this is a Hubble Space Telescope montage. These are near-Earth asteroids that clearly have experienced quite a bit of that dynamic process. All right, and so the impact, no pun intended, of those forces means that the Earth is then showered with a lot of rock and dust. We're talking like 50 metric tons. And if you want a good analogy, this was actually given to me by my brother-in-law, 8 to 10 adult African elephants, depending on the size of the African elephant. Okay, now we know how much material gets to Earth. We can address why Antarctica is such a treasure trove of meteorites. Sorry, I'm too much coffee maybe. But I'm going to answer that question in a roundabout way using this map. Okay, what you're looking at here are all the non-Antarctic meteorites. There's about 29,000 of them. Note, what I want you to note as you're looking at the map is that there are very few over water. There are even less where there aren't very many people. And there's a lot less where there is vegetation, say the rainforests, both in Africa and South America. And what you're looking at is a bias or a pattern. And the pattern is both for population. This is where people can see fireballs and see meteorites and interact with them in their daily human activities where they can pick them up off the ground. To some degree, there is also what we call a preservation bias. And so the meteorites that fall in the areas where there's a lot of weathering and a lot of rain won't preserve them, but they will be preserved in areas where there are deserts, either hot or cold. Now, I know that this is, Jesse and I talked about this a little bit earlier. What I wanted to tell you and reinforce is meteorites actually fall equally all over the planet. And so now we can get closer to that question, to answering the question of why there are so many more meteorites in this ridiculously forbidding place. Why do we want to go someplace where it's always windy, super cold? And the reason for that is because in that 50 years that we've been recovering meteorites from Antarctica, we know that there is this unique mechanism. It's basically a meteorite freezer with an ice conveyor belt delivery system. Remember, meteorites fall equally all over the planet. In Antarctica, they land equally all over the ice and then are buried. And they're buried for up to several million years, probably even longer, because the center part of the continent's been covered with ice for almost 10 million years. The ice moves. You can't see it moving, but it's moving very, very slowly under its own weight from the center of the continent out towards the margins. And when it encounters any kind of like subsurface topographic high or a mountain, a hill, anything, the ice has no choice but to go up and over it. In some cases where the ice reaches the surface, the winds and the dryness of Antarctica evaporate all that ice away. And so you get meteorites that are literally stranded in these little areas, and they can accumulate hundreds or thousands of meteorites in just, tens of thousands of years. And so we can basically go out to areas that they've identified as being stranding surfaces, that's what we call them, and collect hundreds or thousands of meteorites. Sadly, most of the meteorites that are essentially carried out to the continental margin are probably lost in the ocean. Okay. Since Bill Cassidy started the program in the late 1970s, there have been multiple other programs that have started, including China, Korea, Japan. Theirs is the longest running one compared to ours, and even a European consortium. And so we've been able to accumulate almost 50,000 meteorites in that time. And what's fun is if you look at it, they're kind of concentrated in areas where there are mountains and places where the ice gets stranded. But imagine how many more meteorites are essentially in the places that we've never been able to look. All right, you got to be wondering at this point, who gets to go look for meteorites? In the case of most of these programs, because they are almost exclusively focused on looking for rocks from space and the science associated with it, it's planetary scientists. And unlike our Antarctic explorer that we see here from the turn of the century, a lot of these scientists have never been camping, let alone Antarctic camping. But that said, people are selected by a principal investigator who's part of academia. They select the team each year. They basically manage all the administration that goes with that expedition. We also have a mountaineer. This is the person that you see here on the right-hand side. That person is our safety officer. They make sure that we don't fall into crevasses. They keep all the equipment running, and they can perform some minor first aid. When I say minor, I mean that, and we'll talk about that in a second. We also take, on occasion, an astronaut. This is Don Pettit, who is a friend of mine. He went with me in 2006, and at the age of 69, just last fall, returned from the ISS, his third trip that lasted 220 days. He's a very, very interesting guy. All right, we go to collect meteorites when it is summer in the Southern Hemisphere. So our winter now would be the time when people would be going to meteorites, although this is the end of the austral summer in Antarctica. So a lot of the science is currently wrapping up. All of the team members are essentially gathered around Thanksgiving to Los Angeles and then flown to Christchurch, where ultimately we will prepare to go to Antarctica. We'll spend about 5 to 8 weeks, depending on the weather, looking for meteorites. And everybody who goes has to physically qualify. This is actually really important because there's no hospital in Antarctica, and it's very expensive to fly people from Antarctica back to New Zealand. This is the reason why we end up with the occasional astronaut team member, because they're always physically qualified. And a lot of times we don't know who gets physically qualified until almost the end of, right before we're supposed to fly. So All right. Once we're in Christchurch, we stop at this place called the Clothing Distribution Center. The Clothing Distribution Center essentially is a requirement because we're going to leave New Zealand and get out directly onto the Antarctic ice. And so we have to be prepared to manage that Antarctic environment. Every piece of clothing that you saw on the wall in the previous slide has to be tried on. It has to fit perfectly. Poor fitting clothes mean that we will be cold, and a cold team member is actually dangerous to the rest of the team. And one of the things that I recall very, maybe not so fondly, but amazingly, was that all of the clothing, when I put it on, weighed in excess of 30 pounds. So you actually are weighed before you get on the plane, because cargo is an important part of managing flights to Antarctica. And also in the process of putting all that on, and you're in the summertime in New Zealand, it's pretty warm. So you have to spend quite a bit of time wearing all of your gear in the summer of New Zealand. But it's okay, because once you get off that plane, you're going to get off directly onto the sea ice into the extreme cold of the Antarctic environment. And it is literally a cold that takes your breath away. Now, we're about 20-ish miles away from where we're going, which is McMurdo Station. We get a nice warm bus ride from the plane to McMurdo Station, which is perched here on the edge of the volcanically active Ross Island, Antarctica. And this is essentially kind of a frontier town that was built by the National Science Foundation to support all of the US sponsored or supported science activities in Antarctica. And you can see here, Mount Everest is very quietly steaming in the background, but for the most part, it is a relatively safe volcano. And this is basically where we begin becoming Antarctic explorers. We start that process in this interesting blue Quonset hut, which was probably built in the 1950s by the Navy. This is called the Berg Field Center. This is the place where all of our gear is stored from year to year. Been 50 years, and most of that gear is more or less the same, although it does get improved bit by bit. It is also the place that we're going to do all of our grocery shopping. You see here in the center picture, this is on the top floor of the Berg Field Center. And here we have to basically collect all the food that we are going to take with us into the field. We're going to get put into the field. We're going to get taken out of the field. And the likelihood that we'll get any planes delivering anything to us in the middle part is quite rare. So we got to be prepared. Now, what's interesting about this, and I think everybody accepts that once you've done it once, all the food is expired by a year. And the reason for this is it takes about a year for all the food to get shipped from the continental US down to Antarctica. And I'm here to tell you about it. So don't be so quick to throw your food away if it's expired by a day or two. It's actually quite fine. All right. The next thing we do is we get safety training. We get a crash course in how to handle ropes, actually mostly how to keep the ropes from getting tangled, so that we can potentially rescue someone if they happen to fall into a crevasse, which hasn't ever happened, but in case it does, we are prepared. So we do a classroom sort of education, and then we do a practical, which is part of what we call the shakedown experience, which helps familiarize us with how we put our tents up, how we actually pack everything onto the sled. We have to make sure all of our equipment is actually in working order before we get on the plane and go into the deep field, because again, we probably won't have any air support in the middle part of the season. Then everything gets boxed up, it gets strapped together, it gets palletized and loaded into this amazing cargo plane. This is called an LC-130 Hercules. These are planes contracted by NSF from the Air National Guard, in this case, the New York Air National Guard. And the important part of these is you'll see that this is loaded, it has skis on instead of wheels, and that allows it to pretty much land on any of the snow and ice surfaces that are in Antarctica. Once we are airborne, it doesn't really take very long, maybe about 3.5, 4 hours. We're then flying over the staging area known as the Beardmore Glacier. NSF finds areas that are relatively stable in which the glacier isn't moving very much, so they can groom runways and make it a lot easier for these planes to land, unpack, and then take back off again, because the weather changes very frequently and without much advance notice. What was super disconcerting was that, and you'll see here in the middle picture, right about the time that the plane is getting ready to land, they drop the back door and they dump everything that we need to survive, everything we've carefully packed, out of the back of the moving airplane. Just literally minutes later, we're landing. We can't worry about the condition of the gear because we have to then take everything off the pallets because they want those pallets back. Then we have to pitch our tents, get warm, and get fed. And then we can think about packing everything up back on our sleds so that we can commute to the meteorite hunting areas. All right, what does camping in Antarctica look like? Let's start with what the early explorers did. I don't think this looks too bad. Of course, I have experience camping in Antarctica now. You get a tidy pyramidal tent. They are actually made to withstand upwards of 70-mile-per-hour winds. But they put 4 people in that tent. Not much has actually changed. We use the same pyramidal tent. It is canvas, 2 walls of canvas and wooden poles. It is named for Robert Falcon Scott. He was a 19th century British naval officer and one of the earliest Antarctic explorers, and it was named for him. We now only keep 2 people in there. And I don't want to spend too much time here other than to point out that what you're looking at is an environment in which we cannot look for meteorites. You'll notice that it is overcast. You see no features whatsoever, which makes it very, very dangerous to drive. We could potentially fall into a crevasse, or we could tip our sled over, or our skidoo over, basically, on what we call sastrugi. These are these sort of wind sculpted ice flows that are actually really dangerous to our equipment. And what I'm doing here, this is me on the outside of the tent, digging out the tent during one of these storms. If you don't dig out the tent, the snow will pile up over the vestibule and you won't be able to get out because the snow becomes very hard very quickly. Like I said, it's a 9'9" plan. It sleeps 2 people very comfortably. We can entertain a guest or 2 for dinner. The top of the tent in the upper left there you see are boots and socks. At the end of the evening, we're not allowed to use our stoves overnight. So when we wake up in the morning, it's about 10 degrees, but the top of the tent can remain upwards of 50 to 60 degrees. So our boots are still warm and our socks are dry at that point. You don't want to put on cold boots in the morning. In the lower left is our solid waste management tent. My 10-year-old nephew, who I gave this talk to, told me I didn't have enough alliteration in this talk, and he told me I had to call it the turd tent. So this is for you, Willie. This is an environmental requirement. We are not allowed to leave any waste on the surface of Antarctica, at least solid waste. We have to pack all of our ice and our recycling as well. Liquid waste is another story. We actually don't carry that back. It sublimates very, very quickly in the windy atmosphere, the windy, dry atmosphere of Antarctica. Now, interestingly, you'll notice in the lower right-hand side, there's a pit. I'm actually chipping ice that we are going to use for our drinking water. We make sure that we pee way downwind of where we actually chip our ice. And the wind always blows from the same direction. So there's never a mystery there. Okay. Meteorite hunting starts when everybody is fully dressed and waiting outside to get started. And getting dressed is a non-trivial exercise. It takes like 10, 15 minutes to put all your layers on. So you want to be cold. You want to basically be ready and warm to start your day. The hunting for meteorites happens in 2 ways. The first is by snowmobile, which is a little easy. Basically, it's like farming for meteorites or plowing a field. The hard part is keeping everybody the same distance from each other and everybody driving at the same speed. That's kind of the easy part. But in any case, once you're driving along, you're only supposed to look in front of you. And if you see a dark rock, you stop your skidoo, you get out. And if it's a meteorite, you do a dance, such as you see here on the left-hand side. That is a PI, Ralph Harvey, our principal investigator, Ralph Harvey, doing the meteorite dance. Once we've identified a meteorite, the collection dance begins. This is where we do simple things that geologists do whenever they're collecting rocks in the field. You do a description, you talk about the size, the color, you take a picture, you record the GPS location. That's what that little antenna is on top of the skidoo. And then because these meteorites are relatively pure, at least as pure as they can be in Antarctica, we use sterile materials to package them up because we want to preserve them as best we can. The second method is not as easy. Sometimes we have to look for meteorites among other rocks. And these other rocks are glacial moraines. And these are essentially produced when the glacier is scraping its way along the mountain range. It scoops up these rocks, it grinds them and crushes them. And what's interesting is Even though the moraines are essentially constantly moving, the meteorites are sprinkled in among them. They're either actively falling, or these are meteorites that have been in the rock or on the rock for a longer period of time. The best part is once you've got a feel for what the meteorites look like, it's actually not very hard to find them. And so there's one here in the middle. See if you can spot it. And of course, there it is. And we'll essentially use both methods every day, weather permitting. Sometimes if it's super windy and we can't drive around with our skidoos, we'll just go and hunt among the moraines. And we'll do this for about 7 to 8 weeks, weather permitting. And of course, if the planes say you need to come back now, then we go back now. And so once we are back in McMurdo, all the meteorites then are collected together and packed up into some insulated shipping containers, those white containers that you see there behind that tractor trailer. And they're shipped to the United States by boat over some period of time. They arrive usually around April or May, and they are trucked directly to NASA Johnson Space Center here in Houston, where they get thawed, they get dried, they get characterized in a little bit more detail, and then they're made to scientists to do research all over the world. Okay, now we're to the part where what have Antarctic meteorites shown us? Probably one of the most important and I think great discoveries that the Antarctic collections have provided are pieces of the moon and Mars. How we found out about this is more of a combination of timing, a little bit of science serendipity, and then, of course, scientists asking some pretty daring questions. We had rocks that we'd returned from the moon in the late 1970s. And at the same time, and we're talking like now we're at the 50th anniversary of the Viking landers, we had data from these landers. Turns out there was a scientist, his name was Don Bogard, who worked on Viking. And he had a postdoctoral fellow who was analyzing these little strange black spots that are right here in this meteorite, EETA 7901. So it was a meteorite found in 1979. It was being looked at in the early 1980s, and we had all this really interesting data. We knew how to date rocks. We knew that these rocks were younger compared to a lot of the regular asteroidal material, which we already knew was about 4.5 billion years old, or representing the earliest history of our solar system. And so what potentially could these rocks, where could they come from? And it turns out that in the case of identifying EETA 7901, we are pretty certain it came from Mars. So the scientist that was looking in these little glassy pockets found gases that matched data that was collected by Viking. And this graph here that you can see in the very center is a beautiful graph that shows essentially the data from Viking and the data from EETA 7901 were a dead match. This is our first sort of circumstantial evidence. It's a smoking gun. Until we can bring meteorites back from Mars, we won't know absolutely for sure. But nobody doubts that most of these material actually come from Mars. In addition, we looked at rocks from Mars in a way, and this was in 1996, in a way we had never looked at them before. And we think that we saw evidence of potential biosignatures in some of these rocks. And so Mars also provided us with an opportunity to better understand how life may have evolved on some of these rocky planets. And so on the origin of life, a lot of Antarctic meteorites have provided us with a wider array of sample types. This includes a wider array of identifying primitive building blocks of life. All right. And the importance of this is that by identifying evidence that we may have had organic materials from meteorites that are super old that could have delivered these materials to Earth, we wanted to know exactly how much of those materials and what the diversity of those materials would be. And so we used Antarctic meteorites essentially to leverage our ability to go to other asteroids and return some of these materials in a pristine way. In other words, a lot of these rocks have passed through Earth's atmosphere. They've been sitting on Earth for a long time. The rocks that we get from asteroids haven't experienced any of those things. And so we have a better opportunity to understand what the full range of these building blocks are. I have a whole bunch of friends that were actually on this mission. This is called the OSIRIS-REx mission, including the mission scientist. His name is Dante Loretta, who I went to Antarctica with the first time in 2002. And so in essence, everything has sort of come full circle for me. All right, we're done. I'm going to leave you with a summary of what I shared here in these next 2 slides, along with a couple of pictures of some of the fun we were able to have when we were not able to go looking for meteorites. And with that, I will thank everyone for tuning in, and I'm super excited to answer some of your questions.
Oh, Linda, thank you so much. I'll leave that up for a quarter second, and then we'll begin with our Kahoot. We're going to dive in with Q&A after that. So thanks to our live classes, YouTube classes. Please do start sharing in the chat anytime. Linda, if you want to come out of screen share so you can see us fully, have a bit of a conversation, that would be awesome. And when you can help us out by giving us hints as we go through our Kahoot. So for those new to Kahoot, including you, Linda, the faster you answer, the more points our classes get. And what they win is our everlasting respect. So no pressure at all. See who is paying attention, have a little bit of fun, and then we will dive in with Q&A. Mr. Hancock's class, you guys are going to be second. Levi, I know you got to go, so we're going to do you first, and we do a Q&A in just a minute. All right, here we go. Drum roll, please. 4 questions coming up in 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Most meteorites come from where? Let's see. We have no idea. The asteroid belt, the Oort cloud, Mars. What do we think? Where was that? There's a image of it. Rendering, shall we say. I might have one on me right now, holding my jeans up. So not an Oort cloud, perhaps, not a Mars. Let's see what we've got. Ooh, a lot of you thought Mars. So there are meteorites that come from Mars. The asteroid belt is where most of our meteorites come from. I love that we got that. We mixed a few people up to have the fun. Glorious Walrus has our lead. Going into question 2. About how much stuff hits the Earth every year? Is it 50 pounds, 500 pounds, 5,000 pounds, or 50 metric tons? So much stuff. I find this amazing. This is one of those facts that I learned about much older, like I would say in the last couple of years, and it blows my mind that it's this much. So that's your hint, everybody.
A lot of it's dust.
A lot of it's dust.
Yeah.
We mixed up almost everybody. So a lot of you thought 5,000, but no, 50 metric tons. Elephants and elephants and elephants and elephants of stuff hit the Earth every single year. It's a crazy amount of stuff that comes through to our planet. Glorious Walrus keeps our lead, changes our leaderboard entirely. All right, 2 more. Here we go. Antarctica has more meteorites land on it than anywhere else. Is this true or false? So many answers coming in fast. Hope you've taken a second to think about it, because I'm in Newfoundland and I could go out. There could be a meteorite in my backyard right now, but it's hard to find because there's a whole bunch of other rocks there. But in Antarctica, if you're in the middle of an ice sheet and you're like, oh, there's a rock. That is the key to why we go there. Oh, so many of you thought true. No, this is our big takeaway. Linda, reiterate this for us. The answer is false. Why?
Meteorites fall equally all over the planet.
If you are in a big field of rocks, it's really hard to know if one of those rocks is a meteorite. If you're in a big field of ice and there's a rock right in the middle of it, you're like, okay, that's probably a meteorite. And then you can prove that. They do not fall more commonly in Antarctica than anywhere else. They're just much easier to find. Elated Hedgehog takes our lead going into question 4. There are meteorites in Antarctica that come from the moon and Mars. So a few of you picked Mars earlier for the most meteorites. So maybe you're on the right track already. We already have questions about this in the chat, so I love that we're going to cover this as a topic. With 8 seconds left, the answer is true. I will say that. Yes, most of you got this right. Let's see what that does to our leaderboard, and we're going to address some things around this in our Q&A in just a minute. All right. Bright Ant is third. Second is Glorious Walrus. And first, for all the marbles, is it our friend who is leading after 3? Let's see. It is Elated Hedgehog. Way to go. If you are any of these folks, way to go. If you're not, that's fine too. At least you've learned a little bit. This is the fun of Kahoot. We are going to head to Levis, North Topsail Beach. Come on in and start us off with a question. Mr. Hancock and Glenview are coming to you guys next. Hey, Levis.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm awesome. I was wondering, do you get to eat any like meat or fish out there? Because protein is so important.
Yes. We get frozen food in the form of vegetables, meat, and fish. And we fight. The fish that is the most popular is shrimp, sometimes scallops. But for the most part, we eat a lot of meat, a lot of butter.
If I'm ever down there with you, you can have all my shrimp because I don't want anything to do with any of it. This is the worst. We have a food question, actually, a quick follow-up. This is from our classes at Claude Pepper Elementary. Miss Avila's class wants to know why 5 pounds of chocolate per person. That seems like an outrageous amount of chocolate.
It does, doesn't it? Mostly you need calories. It's a calorie-dense food. and that's what keeps you warm.
My wife recently for Valentine's got me one of those big packages of Ferrero Rocher, which are one of the great joys in the world. And that's what I tell myself is I need the calories to do all these broadcasts, be this energetic.
That's a good
Ferrero Rochers. We're going to head to George Chemistry Hankar's class. Come on in. Take us away, guys.
Hey, awesome. We're very elated over here. One of our students was wondering, are there any rare minerals you found?
In meteorites in general? Meteorites are primarily composed of similar minerals that we find here on Earth. The thing that makes meteorites truly unique outside of the kinds of rocks we find here on Earth are specific elements that have been produced in the early history of our solar system. They were isotopes, they were radioactive, essentially elements that get incorporated into the rocks. And these are the things that we use to do things like date them. But for the most part, there are processes that existed in these early, in the early history of the solar system on these planetary bodies that aren't the processes that are operating here on Earth. And so they do produce different combinations of minerals, but nothing that we haven't ever seen before.
Thanks for the question, guys. I know their class is studying some mineral. How do you say that, man?
Mineralogy.
Thank you. There we go. Man, totally tongue-tied. They're studying that right now, so I love that question. Thanks, guys. And how cool. The radioactive isotope thing is just one of the most cool things in all of science. We cover it in a lot of our broadcasts, so every time we get a chance to talk about it, super cool. All right, Glenview. Hello, lunchtime crew. Come on in and take us away. Hey.
Go ahead.
When you're searching for the meteorites, did you ever come across animals?
That is an interesting question. Antarctica is unusual because it is quite barren of any plants or animals. In the deep field out on the plateau, there are none. We occasionally will see a skua, which is a very, very large seagull that occasionally will follow the trail of food out from McMurdo Station to the interior. They occasionally will make it to South Pole. There was one team a couple years ago in a place called La Paz, which is just ice. There's nothing but meteorites out on the ice. And they found a set of bones and they tagged it and went and took pictures of it and then shared it with the biologists in McMurdo. And the following year they went and collected it. It turns out it was a fossil seagull from the Ice Age. Yeah.
By the way, I want to stress, if everyone gets the chance to look up a skua, they're like a seagull if it was evil. Like they have a real look about them. And I love all birds. They're a really particularly savage looking animal. So do check them out.
They can be savage.
Yeah, they're pretty, yeah. Great question, guys. All right, so many from YouTube. Katie wants to know, what's the biggest meteorite you found? She's joining today in Nicaragua.
Oh my gosh. Most of the meteorites that you recover are anywhere from, say, fist size to sometimes smaller. I can't tell you, I don't recall the largest meteorite that we found when I was there both times. There is one meteorite that has been recovered from Antarctica by the US program that is about as big as the space behind me. It's called Big Lou, and it's multiple hundreds of kilograms, and it has its own box where it is kept dry and clean. But I honestly, I don't remember the largest one we found. Maybe something like maybe a little smaller than a basketball.
Still, no matter how big, like truly amazing, no matter what you're checking in on. But I love that question. Thanks, guys. All right. We got a question from a student. How do meteors fall out of the atmospheres of other planets? You have Mars, something's blasted off it. Oh. How does it make it out? If it's so hard for rockets to get a diverse atmosphere, what's the deal elsewhere?
Well, you hit it on the head, Jesse. Most of the material that comes off of a planet, either the moon or Mars, is essentially liberated by an asteroid impact on that surface. Mars' atmosphere is actually just, significant. It's much less dense than Earth. And of course, its gravity is less than Earth. I think it's 0.7. In any case, so it doesn't take very much to liberate that material off the surface. Asteroids essentially are constantly bumping into each other and liberating material because there is no atmosphere in space. So that's easy to do. They get disrupted and then become Earth crossers. But yeah, and as far as we know, we only have material from the moon and Mars.
I was going to ask that next, actually. I didn't know if we'd ever had anything we've captured from Venus ever, but I've never heard of that in any of our broadcasts. So,
Venus's atmosphere is way too dense.
okay.
And the surface is constantly being modified.
So I find this, just to reiterate for our classes, like a rock comes in so fast, it blasts up a chunk that goes so fast that it makes escape velocity, basically, just like a rocket ship would from Earth. So really, really cool stuff. And by the way, vice versa, there are almost certainly Earth meteorites on those places as well. But we have yet to do a big enough survey to find such a thing, but that would be very, very cool for some future astronomers. So I love those. Thanks, guys. All right, one more round with our live classes. Lavi, we're coming back to you for a sec. Mr. Hancock's class had to go, but I'll share one of those, and we'll wrap up with Glenview in a minute. Hey, Lavi.
Hi. So I was also wondering, what does a garden gnome do outside of your tent? Like, does he just sit there and look cute, or?
It's essentially, since we can't actually garden, we want to create a little homey atmosphere. And so the garden gnome was basically to make us smile and keep us happy. It's hard work, basically, living in Antarctica. So
I was going to say, so whether it's like Antarctic expeditions, astronauts in space, people on deep sea ocean research vessels where they're gone for months, like there's so many little things to just bring you joy. A lot of it's chocolate. Chocolate unites all of those things. But whether it's a garden gnome or cool colors or plants in particular, in a lot of ways, we actually were at the South Pole just a few weeks ago live, and they were in the greenhouse talking, amidst all the plants, because it's so big for people to see plant life like the ones behind me. Great question, guys. All right. Mr. Hancock's class had to go, but they want to know, let's see, what made the Japanese expedition stop and look at the rocks to begin with, Linda?
That is a very, very good question. I think it was just serendipity. As part of any survey, when you're doing something for the very first time, you're cataloging everything that you see. You probably collect samples. They were mostly tracking what was going on with the ice, but meteorites are kind of unique. And so I'm sure somebody must have recognized that they were something different and special.
Yeah. And how special is it? Honestly, like, I love this topic. It's been so nice having you on. I just want to stress for all our kids, like, this is one of the coolest bits of science in the whole world. And it's such a thrill to get to have you on to talk about it. So big thank you to you, Linda. We're going to wrap up with one more question. Time flies and you're having fun. So we are nearing the end of the broadcast. But let's head back to Alec West. Come on in and take us away with a final query. Hey, guys.
What are meteors made of?
Meteors or meteorites? Meteors are the optical phenomenon. That's your fireball. And that material that is essentially vaporizing or ionizing is rocky material. It becomes essentially, you take all the elements that make up the individual minerals. In this case, these minerals are very similar to the kinds of minerals that we find in volcanoes or volcanic rocks. Olivine and pyroxene and feldspar. And so what happens is, literally, the pressure and the heat is so great that it causes the elements essentially to disaggregate from each other and essentially become this beautiful, fiery, ionizing trail. But the material that makes up the meteorites are essentially a mixture of minerals that are very similar to the kinds of materials we find here on Earth.
But so cool that they come from elsewhere. And I want to stress, we've had some really cool walkthroughs of geology labs in the Moon Rock Lab in Texas, where they sort of showed the things that we actually captured on the Apollo missions. Some of the coolest things we've ever had on. I know geology is not necessarily a gateway science for a lot of you, but when you dive into it in the brass tacks, it is so, so fantastic. So thank you, Linda, for being such a stellar guide today. I want to stress for all our kids, this is on YouTube, so if you want to share with family and friends, you can. And I can't encourage you enough, just as an amazing resource highlighting women in STEM generally, ifthenshecan.org totally rocks. That's my plug of the day. There you are. Before we bring in our classes to say a big thank you and farewell, Linda, is there any final message you want to leave us with about your work in Antarctica, about all the meteorite stuff you had the chance to capture?
I just want to mention, you mentioned gateway science, and geology in general is a really great science because it's very interdisciplinary. And I want to stress too that, I started with a passion. I gained experience. Don't be afraid to leverage any experience that you get in order to do something you really want to do. I had lots of great opportunities, but I also made the most of those opportunities. And so I would say, follow your bliss and get experience so that you can do lots of really cool things in your life.
No better message than that. We've already got things coming into my email literally being like, now I want to go hunt meteorites, which is a great problem to have. And that's not just students, but teachers as well. So Linda, you're changing a whole bunch of careers all at once here. As we do to wrap up every broadcast, I'm going to bring in our classes to say a big thank you and farewell. If you're on YouTube and you want to scream and yell, you have my permission to do so. Ignore the principal. La vie. Have a good one. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful